Good to see everybody. So once again, Ari is busy in his office today, so I'm here to welcome you and introduce Rav Avi. So this is the last program for this week. We've got lots of things coming up next week. The title of this week we've heard from Paul Lips, Robbie Gringrass, and Jody Magnus yesterday, and today we're hearing from Rav Avi Strausberg, and the title of the program is Part 2. What is that? Echo. Sorry, I'm getting an echo. Today is Part 2 of Love, Sex, and Relationships in Jewish Tradition, and it's sponsored by CSP Community Scholar Program, which is now in its 20th year. The upcoming programs for next week are, starting on Sunday, May 3rd, Paul Lips is starting a new series, Part 1, Creating a Nation, which is focused on Iraqi Jews. May 4th, Danny Matt, Elijah the Prophet, the Man Who Never Died. May 5th, we'll be back with Robbie Gringrass. He's going to be speaking about everything you need to know about Israel through the songs of Kobe O's and T-Pax. May 6th, Carol Isaacs will speak about The Wolf of Baghdad, a story of lost homeland and of a family's memories. The CSP annual fundraiser is coming up. Please support CSP. Email Ari if you'd like to be on the CSP list. If you aren't already, it's aricats18@gmail.com. As far as our process for today, I'm about to hand this over to Rav Avi, but we're going to all stay muted during her presentation, and then at the end we'll open up for a little bit of Q&A if anyone would like to ask questions. And just a few words about Rav Avi. So Rabbi Avi Strausberg is the Director of National Learning Initiatives at Hadar and is based in Washington, D.C. She received her rabbinic ordination from Hebrew College in Boston and is a Wexner Graduate Fellow. She also holds a master's in Jewish education. Energized by engaging creatively with Jewish text, she has written several theater pieces inspired by the Torah and maintains a Daf Yomi haiku blog in which she writes daily Talmudic haikus. So with that, I'm going to turn my mic off and hand it over to Rav Avi.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Avi. It's exciting to see some faces back from before, and if there's some new faces, welcome. It's exciting to have you join as well. It's great to, there's something sort of amazing that in this virtual moment, that really 5 sessions is a lot of time that we have together, and it was already nice getting to hear some of those comments last time, and I'm looking forward to, as we continue digging into learning, continuing to bring your voices into the conversation, even it's through the chat forum. So I'm looking forward to deepening the conversation that we already really began last week. So we're continuing in our series on love, sex, and relationships. Last week, we really dove into thinking about communication. How do we best communicate? How do we communicate our needs? What are all the things that we're not saying? What are we saying when we are saying those things? And sort of the many ways that communication can break down in really any type of relationship, whether it's a romantic relationship, a friendship, a work relationship, but really thinking about what is the language that we're using and how do we communicate what we mean to communicate. This week, we're going to be looking more at the role of sacrifice and compromise in relationships. And again, some of the texts that we're going to be looking at are really assuming partnership in terms of a romantic relationship, specifically in terms of marriage. So that'll be our framework today. But I think the question of sacrifice and compromise in a relationship is really a question that extends beyond romantic relationships, beyond marriage, but it's a question that we find comes up all the time in our relationships, whether it's a close friendship. How much do you sacrifice? How much do you give in a particular relationship? Or whether certainly in family relationships, caring for children, caring for parents, caring for siblings. Sort of the central question is, when we're in these close, intimate relationships, what is the balance of giving for someone else while still holding on to yourself? How do I hold on to my identity, what I need, what I want, what I am pursuing, at the same time while working towards what is best for the unit, for that friendship, for that family member, for that marriage? So some of the questions that we're going to be looking at, I'll just give you 3 questions that I'll lay out that we'll be thinking about today that'll be animating the text we're going to be looking at. How much giving is too much? And how much taking is too much in a give and take relationship? What is the right amount of compromise and sacrifice in a relationship? How much should you give And when is that giving too much? And how do we move forward as individuals while making decisions together? I think that this is something that comes up all the time, really in marriages. Two people with separate needs pursuing their own career goals, suddenly having to make very real choices, sacrifices, compromises around them. And how do you decide whose turn it is when, and how you're making decisions on behalf of the relationship? So those are some of the questions we're going to be looking at. The way that we're going to look at it is we're first going to look at some sources from the Torah. We're going to turn to the Torah, to the very first relationship of Adam and Eve, to see if they have it all figured out, to see what is the Torah's vision of partnership for us. If we only had the Torah, if we only had the relationship of Adam and Eve, what would that teach us about the roles of partnership, compromise, sacrifice, and relationship? And then from then, we're going to look at a very sort of like the iconic love story of the rabbis. We're going to be looking at the story of the marriage and the relationship of Rabbi Akiva, one of the great rabbis of the first and second century, and his wife Rachel. But first, we are in the Torah. I dropped into the chat the source sheet. I'll just drop that in one more time for any newcomers. So you can either, I think you either had the source sheet attached to the email that went out, your confirmation that you got for signing up the class, or you can just follow the Google link to the source sheet through the chat that I just shared, but hopefully everyone will have access to the source sheet there. If there are any issues, you can just chat if you don't know where to find the source sheet. And again, just sort of a reminder for how we're working in the class. Really, in the ideal world, I would love to be doing this in person with you. I would love to be pausing and calling on you and having a rich back and forth conversation that is more difficult to have happen in Zoom, and especially with a little bit of a larger group. So I would love for you I will pause at very specific moments. I'm going to ask you questions. I'm going to ask you to respond via the chat. Then I'll respond to your comments. So to the extent that using the chat, we can have a back and forth conversation, I very, very, very much invite and welcome your participation. And I'm looking to you to help me read and understand these texts together. Okay, no further ado. Let's do some learning together. So you have the source sheet hopefully in front of you. Let us know if there's a problem if you don't. I'm now looking at the source sheet. So we're going to look at two verses back to back that come from the book of Genesis, both from chapter 2. So let's see what God has to say to us about partnership. Vayomer Hashem Elohim, lo tov heyot adam levado, eselo ezer kenegdo. So the Lord God said, lo tov heyot adam levado, it is not good for man to be alone. I will make him an ezer kenegdo. So this is a difficult phrase to translate, and if you looked up a bunch of different translations, you would get a bunch of different answers. But basically, ezer, the word there for ezer is a helper, from the word to help, and kenegdo generally means opposite or against. So sort of the most standard translation we have here is, it's not good for man to be alone. I will make him a helper that is against him. Oftentimes we have that translating as a fitting helper. So if you look at the first translation I gave you, it comes from the Jewish Publication Society, from JPS. So I will make a fitting helper is how they're translating ezer kenegdo. A different translation that I think gives us a different ring to what that relationship is. There's an amazing translation that's done by Robert Alter, a famous sort of biblical analyzer and writer, a scholar, that's the word I wanted, scholar. And Robert Alter, the idea of Robert Alter's translation is he looks at how the roots of these words have been used across the Tanakh, across like all the different places where they might have appeared, and then tries to figure out sort of the most accurate literal meaning. And so Robert Alter suggests a slightly different translation than ezer kenegdo, than fitting helper, which is the one that we normally hear. He says, I will make a sustainer beside him. And he says in his note there, why a sustainer? He says it's true that sometimes ezer is used sort of in that helping, in that assisting context, but he says there are other places in the Tanakh. Let me just finish the sentence and I'm going to say a word about what the Tanakh is, just in terms of terminology. He says that there are other places in the Tanakh where ezer has a stronger word than just a helper, which sounds like assistant, that it's more like sustainer, enabler, strengthener. Okay, just a word about what the Tanakh is. So you have the Torah. When I say Torah, I'm referring to the Chumash, which is the 5 books: Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. The Tanakh is that acronym that stands for, the Taf stands for Torah, the Nun in the Tanakh stands for Nevi'im, all the books of the prophets, and the Chaf at the end stands for Ketuvim, all the books of the writings. So a Tanakh includes all 5 books of the Torah, all the prophets, and also all the books of the writings. So that's why, so when Robert Alter is coming up with his translation, he's looking through all of Tanakh to see all the instances of the word, how Ezer is used, that root, and he's seeing it's not just this sort of helper, which sounds like an assistant to man, but that it might, in other places, it has that stronger meaning of sustainer. Okay, so regardless of how you translate, we have from the very beginning, it's not good for man to be alone. Why was partnership introduced to the world? Why was woman introduced into the world? Because we needed to have someone opposite man. We needed to have either a helper or a sustainer that would be kenegdo. Just want to check out David's comment here. Sounds more like the translation should be in contrast to him, against him, based on the language of kenegdo. Yeah, so David, that's already great. And I think part of why I'm actually not generally such a nitpicky about grammar, but the translation is really important here. And that's why I appreciate David's comment, and that's why I want to spend a moment on it, is how you translate the words ezer kenegdo really affects how we understand the nature of the relationship between Adam and Eve. So that's why we're spending a moment on it. And David, to sort of go with your point, what you're reading into it, we're going to look at one more verse from Genesis, and then we're going to look at a few different later commentaries to see how they're understanding it. And some of them definitely do have your meaning, the against there. Okay, so let's go on. So we have this first verse from Genesis. Why was partnership introduced into the world? Because man needed that ezer kenegdo, needed that sustainer, that helper against him, behind him, whatever that is. Let's look at the next source, also from Genesis, a little bit later in the chapter. So then the man said, "This one at last is bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh. This one shall be called woman, for from man she was taken." The idea there, just on the language, is lizot yikare isha kime ish lekacha zot, that this one shall be called woman because from a man. That in Hebrew, the language of isha is taken from the word ish, from man, that there's a linguistic connection between the word for man and woman. So we call this one that's taken from man, we call her isha because she is taken from the ish. And so going on, al ken ya'azov ish et aviv ve'et imo, and so for this reason a man will leave his mother and will father, v'davak be'ishto, and should cling to his wife, v'hayu levasar echad, and they should be as one flesh. So the notion here, first you have in the very beginning, poor Adam, he was alone and lonely and didn't seem to know what to do with himself. And so God says, we have to create this ezer kenegdo to be with him in some way. And at this point, it's not totally clear what is the relationship, what is the power balance, what is the role of sacrifice or compromise in this relationship between Adam and the ezer kenegdo, this helper. And then we see a few verses later, how is this relationship supposed to work? That in the beginning, a man will be, what's sort of interesting in the case of Adam, is that he had no mother and father to leave. There was no family to leave. But ultimately, the way God sees it playing out here is that a man will grow up in the house of his family and his parents, but ultimately come to leave that family and cling to his wife, that the man should cling to the wife, and that together they'll become a basar echad. Together they'll become one flesh. So I'd love to turn to the chat now to hear, sort of based on just these two verses, what you have here. What is the Torah giving you? What is an ideal relationship look like? If this is all you had, what should a partnership be? What should be the balance of compromise and sacrifice, sort of based on these verses? So I'll give you a moment, acknowledging that it takes people time to formulate thoughts and to chat them into a chat. But what does relationship look like? What does sacrifice and compromise look like based on these verses in the Torah? So you can go ahead and start chatting. Okay, good. So Avi, I think this was chatted to me privately. I hope it's okay to share it out. So Avi wrote equal partners. Right, interesting. And also Rita wrote equality. I'm so interested where that's coming from. I think it's probably from that reading of Ezer Kenegdo, the neged being opposite or corresponding. It's interesting because I think when you translate it perhaps incorrectly, which often people do translate it as fitting helper, I'm not sure that fitting helper carries with that same implication of equality or equal partners. And that's why the translation there is really important. Is the woman a sustainer? Is she an Ezer Kenegdo, or is she a fitting helper? Affects how you understand that mutuality there. So Wendy says, the objective, to find where you can come together, spouse over parents. Okay, so that's interesting. So that's Wendy, I think that it's so hard with these because I can't get to hear really the fullness of what you're thinking and why you're saying it. But Wendy, I imagine that you're referring to the Basar Echad there. A part of the Basar Echad is figuring out where do we come together. I think the question with that Basar Echad is how far do we push that Basar Echad? How far do we push that one flesh? Are we meant to be, does Basar Echad mean that we have to be united in all of our decisions, in all of our moves, that we have to be totally aligned? Or is there still place for us not to come together? And then also, Wendy, you're noting that sometimes there might be sort of conflict between one's family and one's spouse. And so that this might be suggesting in those moments of in the instances in which there is conflict, there is a choice to be made that the Torah is really pushing us to, no, you have to go with your spouse. This is the new sort of co-decision maker in your life, whereas it might have been your family for so long. So Jake says sort of one-sided, right? Everything seems to be based on Adam's point of view or based around Adam. So that's a really important point that, the Torah seems to be providing us with a patriarchal view, certainly of marriage and relationships, in which the woman is coming from the man. Even if we go with that stronger translation of sustainer, it's still the role of the woman is to sustain the man. And so I think that that's a question. If we were to take this as our relationship guidebook for relationships today, sort of in a world in which how we think about gender and roles is different, what does this offer us? Or how do we sort of re-understand who's helping who and who's compromising when, and what's that balance like? Let's just look at a few other comments here. We can choose our partner, but we don't choose our parents. It's very interesting, right? That ultimately you're making the decision to go off with your partner. Someone who will give honest and loving feedback to bring balance. I love that as Pat, as a reading of Ezer Kenegdo. What does it mean to be that helper that's opposite that role of honest and loving feedback? So that's amazing. And that's where we're actually going to be, the subject of our next session will be honest and loving feedback. That's not the language I use, but I love that language very much. The inseparability of the Basar Echad. Joanne says, the couple becomes a unit that works together, creating something new. A new family separate from the families they came from. Their unit is the important one, right? And so the question is, how do you do that creating of the new thing together? Your comments are so great. Okay, I'm gonna stop reading all of them out loud. I'm hoping that you're reading the chat as well. Amy says it highlights a person's need for help, right? That none of us can do it alone, that we all need someone else. I love this, David, to be the best of friends. That's really the ideal relationship, is to have someone who's not only a partner, but the best of friends. Okay. Amazing. So I appreciate, what is the Hebrew for cling? That's lehida bek, v'davak be'ishto, clings to his wife there. Such a strong word that the person is supposed to cling to the other. Interestingly there, in terms of the imbalance, you might think that the text would say that the wife should cling to the man, but it actually is it's Adam that's clinging to the wife. So that's sort of in terms of thinking about that balance, that is, Eve is actually at the center of that there. Okay, so thank you so much for all of your comments. It's hard for me to pull away from them. They're so great. So keeping these in mind, I now want to turn to, so all of you were offering different and compelling understandings of what the relationship might look like, what this is teaching us about relationships, and specifically how we might understand that phrase, Ezer Kenegdo. Is it someone who's providing loving feedback? Is it someone who's helping us build something new together? Is it someone who is sort of pushing back against us in a strong way? What is the role of that helper? So let's look at some of the commentators to see how they understand the role of the Ezer Kenegdo. So we're going to turn first to, this is source 3, to the Ibn Ezra. He's a 12th century commentator on the Torah. So he says, what is Ezer Kenegdo? It's a helpmate. So you hear that language of the coming from the word la'azor, to help, a helpmate, but who will be equal to him, also reflecting the divine image. I think that's really powerful here. You might think there are some understandings of the woman being taken from the man in which somehow the woman is less than man, that the man is sort of the full thing and the woman just comes from the bone. But this is the Kenegdo is teaching us, no, she is also reflecting the divine image. She is equal to him. The reason why the Torah added the word Kenegdo is that whenever one confronts someone of equal power, moral, and ethical weight, such a confrontation is termed neged, opposite, corresponding. It is a head-on collision of will. When the two parties disagreeing are not of equal power or moral and ethical weight, the confrontation is termed as one being ole, going up, and one being yored, as going down. One of the adversaries is always prevailing or losing in such an encounter. It's an amazing commentary by someone in the 12th century that he's saying the woman in the relationship, as it's conceived by the Torah, is of equal power. She is also reflecting the divine. And I think there's something really powerful in envisioning the relationship in that way, in that no one in this relationship is ole and yored. No one is going up or going down. This isn't adversarial in that way. This is two people that are of equal power and of equal force, and in some way have equal pushback on each other. I think that there's something really powerful in conceiving in a relationship that way. I think that there's also something challenging about that, because what happens when you get two people of equal force together with strong opinions and they strong needs? This is where we sort of come up to problems in the relationship of, there always has to be that give and take, and what happens when people are of equal strength. So that, I think part of, I appreciate his reading of Ezer Kenegdo, but it's also part of what raises the question of the role of compromise and sacrifice in a relationship. Okay, we're going to read two more of these, and then I'd love to hear your thoughts on them. So Abarbanel says, how do we understand the word Ezer? He says, a helper, if it just said Ezer, it would imply another of just the same kind, as a doctor can help another doctor, or a tailor, another tailor. But an Ezer Kenegdo implies someone complementary. So the Abarbanel here is saying it could have just said, E'eseh lo Ezer, I will make for him a helper. And the way that the Abarbanel reads it is that if it just said helper, it would be sort of like a helper that is a helper in the same way that the man is helping him do the thing he does. So the doctor needs a helper who knows how to be helping the doctor, or the tailor needs a tailor helper helping them to do. But actually the addition of the word kenegdo, he argues, means that the two people are not occupying the same exact role. They're not exactly the same thing. There's something separate. I think the sort of the way that kenegdo means opposite or corresponding to, that there's something separate about the second person's role, and that the way in which they're helping is because they're bringing something new to the relationship. They're bringing something complementary. Again, I think a powerful view of a relationship, this is not necessarily to say, it's still, I think these readings are not mutually exclusive. It could still be that they're of equal power, but it's suggesting that part of what makes some relationships work so well is that people are actually different and have different needs and different backgrounds, that there's something complementary about their skill set. Again, it raises the question, if you have two people that are not the same, it means that they have different needs and wants, and that sometimes and inevitably compromise is going to have to be a part of that relationship. Okay, let's look at one more together. This comes from the 16th century commentator, the Sforno. He says, how do we understand the word kenegdo? He says, literally it means an opposite helper, the image coming from a set of scales which rest precisely opposite each other when they are in balance. So what does kenegdo mean? It means really the ideal is that they're exactly like this. I think it's similar to our first text about them being of equal power. I think what the Sforno is bringing for me here is the idea of balance, is that sometimes one of us might have more or less strength, but that the idea when a relationship is really working is that we're supposed to be in balance in some way, that we're supposed to be. And I think also something that's interesting about his image here is a scale is rarely is a scale totally static, right? There's always a little bit of that fluctuation. You're adding more, you're adding less, there's something happening. And so there's a sense in which, you don't just have to make those decisions of compromise and sacrifice once and then you're done. It's like life is a relationship is a series of continuing to reevaluate whose turn is it and what's best for the relationship and what's best for me and what's best for us together. And so it's constantly this active, but are we in balance? Are we balancing? What's the relationship there? So I think that's part of what the Sforno is offering. Okay, I want to pause now to hear, what are your thoughts? What are you thinking about these three different readings? How does it inform how you read the biblical text? What's coming up for you here as you read these three different visions of Ezer Kegnegdo, what the Torah is telling us that ideal relationship should look like? So I'll give you a moment to think and to respond. It's interesting, Patty, looking at your comment that it's, as individuals, we each have our own separate, our individuality and our ego that we're bringing into the relationship. And so part of what it means to be in a relationship is harnessing that ego, taming it a little bit and bringing it into compromise, bringing it into balance. So Muriel says, balance includes respect for each other's opinions and needs, right? This really goes back to the communication, why we start off with communication. You can only get to that respect for each other's opinions and needs if each person is able to clearly communicate their opinions and needs. If you have a relationship where someone's not able to communicate what they need, or someone's communicating and someone's not hearing it, then certainly that scale is going to be out of balance. So in order to get to that place of figuring out the right balance of compromise and sacrifice, the communication is a really key part of that. So David said, part of the issue is that when you move from being subordinate to your parents to equal with your spouse, there needs to be a balance which you have not had before. Yeah, that's an interesting point, is that you're not necessarily making co-parenting decisions with your parents. There is an Olev Yored. There is someone who has power in that relationship and someone who has less power. And so when navigating the newness of marriage and relationship, that's a totally new thing to navigate. How do we make these decisions together? Okay, I'll give you one final moment if anyone wants to get any last comments in there. So Christine says, it's a learning process, that constant communication and adjustment in the relationship. That is definitely true. I was thinking about a line from this week's Parsha, which actually has a lot about relationships, appropriate relationships, healthy relationships, inappropriate sexual relationships to be having. And something that comes back on over this week's Parsha is Achrei Mot Kiddushim, the double Parsha. In the second Parsha, Kiddushim, we have that language of Kiddushim to you should be holy. And I was thinking that language today, it's in the future, Kiddushim to you should be holy, which is to say that being holy is something in the future. It's something we're working towards, and it's something that's a process. And so part of what we're looking at in this course is, what do holy relationships look like? And so I think that really, Christine, your comment resonates with me, that when we're working towards holy relationships, it's in the future. Your relationship should be holy, which means we're constantly in the process of working towards it. So Amy says, equal in power, complementary in energy and ability, opposite in relation to the other. That there's a back and forth. So amazing. So Amy, what you're doing is you're sort of, and that's part of why I wanted to bring those three comments is it's interesting to me to try to suss out what is exactly the difference in the language that they're using. How are those comments similar and how are they different? So I like, Amy, that you're sort of weaving them all in together. Lindy says, learning how to understand the other person's method of communication and expectations, and finding the way in which to give to each other self-belief, being willing to compromise when needed. So Lindy, for me, your comment just brings me back to really what we're trying to define is, what does it mean to be basar echad? That there could be a really simplified notion of basar echad, of one flesh, that means we're just the same. We think the same thing all the time. We want the same thing. And I think that you're offering really nuance for what does it mean to be, this would be your commentary on basar echad, on one flesh. That to be one flesh means learning how to understand the other person's method of communication and expectations. It doesn't mean we think the same thing all the time, but we're trying to understand, finding the way in which to give to each other self-belief, because we might be in different places. And part of that is being that sustainer, that supporter and being willing to compromise when needed. Okay, amazing. So thank you all of you for jumping in with those comments there, and really for helping us flesh out what the Torah's vision of partnership might be for us. I want to now move on to the text. The text comes from the Talmud. So the Talmud from 200 to 500 CE, it comes from Tractate Ketubah. This is the tractate that's dealing with marriages and relationships and marriage contracts. And we're going to be looking at the story of Rabbi Akiva. So I'm going to, I think, read the story probably straight through in the English, and then we're going to stop to talk about it. So we're back on the source sheet. Okay, so Masechet Ketubot, 62b to 63a. Rabbi Akiva was the shepherd of Ben Kalba Savua. And so just again, a note about the translation, which I offered last time. These translations are pulled from Sepharia, which means the bold is meant to be the literal translation of the text, which this one I believe is in Aramaic. So unless anyone is feeling particularly strong in their Aramaic today, the bold is the translation of the Aramaic, and the not bold is sort of the translator's interpretation to help it flow more smoothly. So I just would sort of glaze your eyes over the not bold. It's sometimes helpful for us, and it's sometimes giving us too much information and doing the work for us. Okay, back in. So Rabbi Akiva was the shepherd of Ben Kalba Savua, one of the wealthiest residents of Jerusalem. That's important to know for the story, that there's a real wealth imbalance, that Rabbi Akiva is a poor shepherd, and he is the shepherd of this very wealthy person in Jerusalem. The daughter of Ben Kalba Savua saw that Rabbi Akiva was humble and refined. She said to him, "If I betroth myself to you, will you go to the study hall?" It's pretty amazing for a woman in a rabbinic text in the 2nd century. She's very forward. She seeks out this poor shepherd, and she says in this text, "If I promise to get engaged to you, will you go and learn?" And he says, yes. She became betrothed to him privately and sent him off. Her father heard this and presumably was angry. He removed her from his house and took a vow, prohibiting her from benefiting from his property. So the idea here is this is sort of like a classic story of she gets herself engaged to a guy. There's this real wealth difference. The father doesn't approve. He finds out that she's married to this shepherd, and he's really unhappy. And so he takes a vow. He takes a vow and says, I'm so angry, you'll never derive any benefit, I'm not supporting you, and basically cuts off his daughter. So a very big deal. Meanwhile, in the meantime, Rabbi Akiva goes off to study. So Rabbi Akiva, sure enough, fulfills his end of the bargain. He goes off to study, while this whole time that he's going to be studying, his wife, who at this point is unnamed in the story, which we'll come back to at the end, is unnamed in the story. She's financially cut off from her father, who doesn't approve of this union. Okay, Rabbi Akiva went and sat for 12 years in the study hall, a very long time for someone to go off and study. We'll see when we get to the last class, which is going to be on good sex and bad sex, that actually the Talmud prescribes really regular intervals for when people are supposed to be having sex, and are supposed to come home at a certain interval. And so to be away for 12 years, even in the eyes of the Talmud, this is a very big deal, because it means that for 12 years, and I think that the idea here is, it's not totally clear. I think the idea here at this point is that they're engaged and not married. It could be that they're married, but either way, it's a very significant gap of time for a Torah scholar to be away, either from his fiance or from his wife, assuming that they actually managed to get married. So Rabbi Akiva went and sat for 12 years in the study hall. When he came back to his house, he brought 12,000 students with him, an incredible number, which is to say, here's this poor shepherd who had no Torah learning. He promises to go study. He gets sent off by his fiance, and he comes back with 12,000 students. And when he comes back, as he approached, he heard an old man saying, "For how long will you lead the life of a widow of a living man?" She said to him, "If he would listen to me, he would sit for another 12 years. When he heard this, Rabbi Akiva said, "I have permission to do this." So the scene is that Rabbi Akiva, after 12 years of being gone, he comes back with his 12,000 followers, presumably to show him, like, look how successful I am. This is what I've been doing with my time. This is all the learning I've accumulated. And he overhears this, like, older man neighbor sort of saying to his wife, what are you doing? Like, you're suffering. How long are you going to be a living widow? How long are you going to stay in this situation? And she says, if I had my way, he would sit for another 12 years. And without even coming home, without saying a word to her, he says, I have permission. And so then he's going to go back out. So we'll keep reading. He went back and he sat for another 12 years in the study hall. When he came back after another 12 years, so he's now been gone 24 years, he brought 24,000 students with him. If you're keeping track, the rate is 1,000 students per year. Okay, that's a good Twitter following. His wife heard and went out to greet him. Her neighbor said, again with the neighbors in her town, borrow some clothes and wear them. She said that presumably the idea is what? That now this important scholar with 24,000 followers is coming home and she's going out to greet them. And the neighbors say, like, what are you wearing? You're wearing rags. Like, you have to get yourself dressed up. This is an important man. This is an important scholar. Borrow some clothes and make yourself look nice for this man. And she says to them, quoting from the book of Proverbs, which is amazing that she knows the book of Proverbs. That's interesting. She says, a righteous man understands the life of his beast. I'll just let that sit there for a minute. When she came to him, she fell on her face and kissed his feet. His attendants pushed her, and he said to them, leave her, as mine and yours is hers. Sheli v'shelachem shelahu. So what happens? This woman, she doesn't put on her finest gown. She goes out in her whatever she's wearing because she says, a righteous man knows her beast. I don't need to dress to impress him. He'll know who I am. He's fine with my am. And the attendants see this woman coming out and they go to push her away. You know, they go to stand up and protect the rabbi. And Rabbi Akiva says, actually, mine and yours are hers. And so then they reunite. Okay, we'll do the end of the story. In the meantime, her father heard that a great man came to town, right? The son-in-law that when he found out that they were engaged, said, this can never be, I'm denying you all benefit. So he hears that the great man comes to town. He doesn't know who it is. And he said, I will go to him. Maybe he will nullify my vow. Rabbinically, you could get out of a vow you made, but only if you have a great rabbi can help you find a loophole to get out of a vow. So it turns out that the father all these years has been feeling bad about the vow he made, cutting his daughter off. And so now he's trying to find a way out of it. So he says, I'll go to him. He came to him, to Rabbi Akiva, to ask him about the vow. And Rabbi Akiva, of course, knows who he is. Rabbi Akiva said to him, did you vow thinking that this Akiva would become a great man? He said to him, if I had believed he would even know one chapter or one halakha, one law, obviously I would never have done this. The idea being that when I made the vow, it was sort of on false premises. I never would have sworn off my daughter if I knew I didn't have the full information. And so then he said to him, I am the son-in-law that you cut off. Then Kalbasavua fell on his face and kissed his feet and gave him half of his money. Okay, so now I want to hear your thoughts on this story. I'm open to your questions. What are your reactions to this text? What are your questions? The things that I'm particularly interested in this text is, who is sacrificing for who are making the compromises, and sort of how do you understand this story? Is this the ideal relationship? Why are the rabbis telling us this story? So I'll give you a moment to chat your thoughts. So Lindy says, I'd love to hear about this play. Lindy says she was in a play. So I'll just say while you're thinking and chatting, I'll say, interestingly, you notice that her name, she's not named in the story. If anything, she's the righteous man knows his beast, right? She's the unnamed woman who gives up everything or doesn't give up everything. She's getting everything she wanted. It's unclear, right? It's unclear whether this is a story of she's the controller of the story and he's doing what she wants, or she's given up everything, but she's unnamed. It's only there are a few sort of parallel versions of this story. And there's specifically a version in another text, and in that text, she's named. So that's from that other text, we're able to pull her name as Rachel. But in this story, she's not named. And also, how does that play into how you understand the story? Okay, so now let's take a moment to read some of your comments. So Lindy says, she's given up everything in her life for him. The Midrash says she even cut her beautiful hair, right? So that's a different version there of all the things that she did, that the ways in which she so the rabbis really tell this story as this is the ultimate story of the righteous woman that supports her husband, right? What does it mean to be ezer kenegdo? It's to, in this sense, to cut off all of your beautiful hair. And you saw this is coming from a different, not a text that's not in front of us, sort of giving up the 24 years, the ability to have children. So Rachel, as Rabbi Akiva's wife, is held up as sort of the ultimate ezer kenegdo, the ultimate helper. So Christine says, equal sacrifices. Good. So Christine, I'd love to hear you flesh that out there. But I think part of it, there is a reading of the text. If you just take the text as it is, it's actually, it could be that he's the one that's compromising, right? She's the one that tells him to go learn. And then he says, okay, I'll go and learn. And then he comes back. She says, well, I wish he would stay there. So if you just take the text actually as the rabbis write it, it could be that actually this is what you wanted. I mean, there's a version of the story. There could be a feminist version of the story where you say, actually, she needed to be married for the sake of the times. So she got that marriage out of the way, but maybe she liked living alone. She was like taken, presumably, it's hard to say. I mean, since she was cut off by her father, I don't really know what her financial situation was there, but you could maybe construct an argument where you said, she needed to be married. So she's not like the single lady. But like, actually, she was happy with the life she was leaving, and she was the one that told him to go, and maybe he's sacrificing. Or is it the total inverse, where it's a story that's constructed to be she's doing it for him, but really she's giving up everything. Okay, equal sacrifice is study what Rabbi Akiva wanted, right? So David, that's sort of echoing Christine's comment of where is Rabbi Akiva in this? Is this? I think that line where he says, so I have permission to do this, that line makes me think that he wants to go back. That I have permission to do this makes me think he was willing to come back, but he just needed, and really the fact that he does, and this goes back to our communication session, he travels all the way back with his 12,000 scholars, overhears the comment, and doesn't say, wait, so you're saying it's okay, like what you really want is for me to go back out? That makes me think that he's just looking to be able to get out of the house again. But again, interesting sort of where communication or lack of communication falls into this. Okay, Wendy says Akiva was not fulfilling his responsibilities as a spouse. Certainly, we're going to look at that in the last session. Yeah, I think that there are some real responsibilities there that, I'm not sure that what he's providing for her, one of the 3 obligations that a husband has to his wife is even in terms of sex, which certainly that hasn't been happening. I hope you guys are all reading the chats as well. Rabbi Akiva completely understood that he would not have been able to pursue his studies if his wife, his life's partner, had not encouraged him to do so. Yeah. The study of Torah is everything, and the helper or sustainer is as worthy since she makes his learning possible. And I think, Muriel, I think that is definitely the rabbi's reading of the story, and what they're bringing the story for is to say Rachel is really held up as both their relationship is held up as like the sort of the ideal of the woman is supporting the man, and the man goes off to study, and he's bringing the Torah back running to the house, and that she, as the sustainer, as their kenegdo, that's what that bottom line of the story is that the learning is really hers. So definitely, it seems that she's sacrificing for him, but maybe she just wanted to be married and not necessarily get involved in the relationship. Right? It's hard to know. Rita says he was selfish. Christine says this is a spiritual partnership. I can't read all of your comments out loud because they're so great, but I'm just going to take a moment with them. Amy says she sees his potential and believes in it. Right, so Beth, they both seem pretty happy with their relationship. I think that that's true in the story as presented. I think if you just take the text as what it is, they both seem pretty happy. I think my question there is, at the end of the day, this is a story that's written by the rabbis. And so so my question there, is this a story in which actually this is the ideal? So Gail says, take the words out of my mouth. Gail says, what kind of partnership? They weren't even together. Is it really a real relationship? So fair enough. Is this a story of the ideal partnership, in the sense that she's asking him to do something, he's doing it, they're both sort of sacrificing, but actually they're both, they seem to both be doing what they want to be doing, right? And that actually it's everyone else around them that's judging their relationship. It's those neighbors that are saying this isn't a good relationship, but the people who are in the relationship are happy. And so who cares what they think? We're happy and we're communicating. Or is the fact that everyone else around them sort of sees the imbalance and sees her and says, you're living the life of a living widow, is that opening up the conversation that perhaps, she's giving up too much. So my question here is, do we take this as the ideal relationship, or is this sort of a rabbinic fantasy? Is this the rabbis constructing a story to teach us what a woman should do and what a woman should give up? And also by holding her up, and saying, she sacrificed for him and all the learning is hers. It's hard to know where she is in the story. If we take her at face value, if she really wanted this, or if the rabbis are writing the character of the woman who wanted to give up everything, who was happy giving this up. Or is this the interpretation of the rabbis to justify the woman's role? Right. Okay. So a lot of questions here. I don't bring this to Lindy. It seems that the woman is the one who runs the home and keeps the spirit and teaching of Torah in the home so that it can shine out into the world. But it's also a selfish thing to do to a woman. And it's a hard question. I mean, ultimately, like really what I want to come down to is I'm not commenting or judging the way anyone else, in the way in which I think the other characters in the story want to judge the relationship. I think for me, I feel like the bottom line here is I think that there's lots of different types of partnerships and relationships that work for people. And it could very well be that there is a relationship that looks like Rabbi Akiva and Rachel's that on the outside to us seems quite strange, for the husband to be gone for 24 years. But maybe for them, it worked for them. I think it could be that is an ideal partnership for those particular people. And it also could be that would be a partnership that would be devastating, either to the person being left at home or the person who's being forced out to study when he doesn't want to study. And I think it's hard to know from this text which it is. Deborah says maybe Rachel's children were the 24,000 students. Yeah. Christine says, why are we not addressing his sacrifices? It could be, Christine. It could be. You could look at it also that way. Perhaps this is perhaps he didn't want to be in the study hall for 24 years. Perhaps he's sort of being forced into a culture where he had to be, this is what he had to be doing, but perhaps there was perhaps he wanted to have children. The students become his children because he's not able to be at home. Yeah, and that that also in the same way that perhaps the rabbis are creating the character of the woman who sends off the husband to study, they're also creating the character of the man who gives up things to study. Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to end with Jody's comment and then we'll read the text together. So Jody said, who said she gave anything up? Based on what you told of the story, it suggests that she sent him away, that she told him to be a scholar, maybe he wanted to be a butcher. Absolutely. Maybe the rabbis wanted to show the importance of study. Absolutely, Jody. Okay, I'm going to leave you guys to keep talking about this. So as you continue talking about this, what you can see is that it's a very rich story, and what's so challenging about the story, how we understand it, what gives so many possibilities is, do we take the story at face value for how the rabbis are telling it, or do we sort of look into the rabbis' agenda ultimately, and what are they trying to get across in constructing the story? I want to share with you a modern midrash, a modern interpretation that comes from a book called Dir Shuni. Dir Shuni from the word lidrosh, to demand, to seek, to interpret, to inquire. So Dir Shuni is a collection of modern midrashim written by Israeli women. And so there's an amazing, I think, you'll judge if you think it's amazing, there's an amazing midrash written by a woman called Rivka Lubitch, who is an Israeli woman. She is a very well-known advocator and lawyer for the rabbinic court in Israel that argues on behalf of all sorts of women's rights and minority rights issues. And so in addition to being very well-versed in rabbinic law, very deeply versed in Jewish text, she also writes midrashim. And so she wrote a midrash that we're going to read now that's called After 24 Years, okay? Keeping in mind that how long was Rabbi Akiva gone? 24 years. So the question, I want to take one pause. I want to take a pause before we read this, okay? This is actually really important. The question I want to ask you is, and I want to just chat out your responses. He comes home. All of you had different interpretations of the story. Was he sacrificing? Was she sacrificing? Is it the ideal partnership? Is it not even a relationship, right? All of those interpretations were in your chats. What happens when he comes home? After 24 years, he comes home, and then Write the ending to the story. What happens? Take 2 minutes to do that into the chat, okay? After 24 years, based on how you understood the story, after 24 years, he comes home, and then what happens? Okay, so Rena says, Akiva gets the money. David, I love it. They understand each other in ways they never could before. Beautiful. Shifi, quite the opposite. The couple has no connection. They each find a new partner. There's no coming back after 24 years. Let's say she even wanted it to be separated for 24 years. How can they come back together? That says, this is not a romantic relationship. He teaches she's happy to be the wife of a scholar. Okay, yeah. So Amy says they're able to marry under new terms that weren't available to them 24 years later. That's amazing. Times change. Rita says she's become so used to being alone that she doesn't need him anymore. I love this next one. They get to know each other because they don't know each other. 24 years later, they begin a relationship. Gail says they are both different people. They learn together about the missing 24 years. They finally have enough money, they can become a true couple of equality together. She ends up cooking for her students. Again, I don't know how she feels about that. Maybe she loves it, maybe she hates it. They have lots to talk about, right? They stay up for night after night after night because they have so much to talk about. Okay, I have to pause so that I can read this midrash. So you see, it's amazing that just sort of in the ways that you all have very different, you fill in the after. Gail says lots of sex. Save it for the last class. Okay, so I'm going to read this midrash out loud to you. It's all in there. What happened in the end to Rabbi Akiva and his wife, the daughter of Kalva Savua, who was married to him in secret and sent him to learn Torah 24 years? In the Beit Midrash of Broria, so just to pause there. So it's a rabbinic in Midrashim. It's sort of like a rabbinic thing that they do. They'll say like in the Beit Midrash of so-and-so. So Rivka Lubitch is creating, there is no Beit Midrash of Broria. She created it. Who is Broria? Broria is the wife of the very famous Rabbi Meir in the times of the Mishnah. Broria is a figure as a woman. She's one of the few women that is named in the Talmud. She is known to be incredibly sharp and witty, well-versed in Torah. And so Rivka Lubitch, the author of this Midrash, has created this Beit Midrash of Broria, which is like the Beit Midrash of these women that learn and talk together. So in the same way that you have like the Beit Midrash of Hillel and the Beit Midrash of Shammai, she's created the idea of the Beit Midrash of Broria. What if Broria were to have a Beit Midrash? Okay, so she says, in the Beit Midrash of Broria, there are those who say it worked out for them, and there are those who say it did not work out for them. That it worked for them, that when he returned, the two of them would sit together during the days, and he would tell her, and she would tell him all about those years that she was in the house and he was in the Beit Midrash. And at nights he would teach her from his Torah. That sounds to me like David, that they understood, that they talked, they understood each other in ways they never could before, that they got to know each other, that it didn't work for them, that she suffered over all the years that she wasn't pregnant and never gave birth. And she would sit and cry over all those babies who could have been born until her tears dried and she longed to die. In vain, he tried to appease her by saying, am I not better to you than 10 sons? That's quoting from the book of Shmuel, from Elkanah, who says to Hannah, when Hannah is infertile and can't, or they're struggling to, and I don't know that they're struggling to have kids. And so Hannah is praying to have kids. And her husband says to her, am I not better than you, better than 10 sons? So she's quoting now from the book of Shmuel. So that she's so upset, and that he tries to appease her and says, am I not better to you than 10 sons? Another version, that it worked for them, that when Rabbi Akiva returned from the Beit Midrash after 24 years, he sent his wife so that she too would learn Torah in a Beit Midrash of women. And when she returned in her old age, they would sit together and become perfumed, him in the aroma of her Torah and her in the aroma of his Torah. And they even had many male and female students. And some say that although this was what happened, it actually didn't work for them, which is sort of amazing, that reading of maybe it did happen. I think that it didn't actually work for them is to say, yeah, maybe he did his learning and then she went and did his learning. And at the end of the day, it just was too hard. They were apart for too many years. They were not able to cross that gap. And even though they were happy, that it didn't work for them. And Sigal said, she creates, Rivka also creates this character of this female character, Sigal, that comments. And Sigal said, that is not how it happened. Rather, when Rabbi Akiva returned after 24 years with 24,000 students, he wanted to come home to his home. There, she's playing in this, so she writes these in Hebrew, that in Aramaic, the word for bait is also the word for wife. Sorry, did I just, I don't know if I just repeated myself. The word for bait, which means home, is also the same word for wife. And so when it says in the story that he wanted to come to his bait, it's not clear if he went to his home or to his wife, because the wife goes to someone's comments, but that the wife is actually inseparable from the house. It's literally linguistically inseparable. So she's saying he wanted to come home to his wife, to his house. He stood at the threshold of the door and couldn't enter the house. His wife said to him, the door to your house is not open to you. Go back where you came from. Okay, so I wanted to just, there's a lot in there, sort of the different, after 24 years, she's imagining what happens, that very rich question of like, okay, let's say they're happy or let's say they're unhappy, but what happens after those 24 years? And she's sort of filling in the story of what are all the different endings to this story. Is the ending that it worked for them, that they then got to know each other and they would sit together and she would share in his Torah and her Torah, his Torah was her Torah? Is it that actually didn't work for them because really this was a constructed story and she had sacrificed too much and it was too much of a loss? Is it that, no, it's a real partnership, that he took his time and then he sent her to, in the same way that she sent him, he then sends her, and it's this partnership of they each, you know, there's the 24 years from him and the 24 years for her, and then they bring that together in the sense of partnership? Or is it that it was that partnership? They did pursue their different things, but it was too hard in their relationship. They couldn't bring it together. Or is it that this was never a partnership at all? Because when he came home, she said, this is not your home and I'm not your wife. So there's a lot in here. I think what I want to, what I appreciate about this midrash is I think it captures all of the different nuances that you saw in the story, all the different ways that we can read this relationship, and the many different ways that I think partnership can look different, that I think partnership can look like, partnership could look like him being gone for 24 years and then them coming back and just sharing in that together. And I think partnership could look like him being gone for 24 years and now it's my turn to pursue my career. Now I'm gone for 24 years. It could look like that. Partnership could look like two people living in totally different countries, but if that's what they want to be doing and they're happy, or that could be a disaster for other people. That I think this is someone mentioned this in the chat, and I do think that this is an interesting reading of the story, is that maybe the read of the story is that what really a partnership is it's different for everyone, but it has to be defined by the people in the story, not defined by the outside neighbors looking in. And so that takes us back to their first class about conversation and communication, is that I think for me the bottom line is, I'm not judging their partnership. I think it could look really different for different people, but the question is that what they each wanted? And were they able to communicate what they wanted to the other person? And was the other person able to hear that and to support them enough? So I think that goes back to what Lindy was saying about what does it mean to be basar echad? What does it mean to be one flesh? Does one flesh mean that you have to be wanting the same thing, doing the same thing? That part of what it means to be one flesh is to be able to really communicate, what do I need out of this partnership? What do you need out of this partnership? How can I support you? How can you support me? Whether or not that happened in the story, I don't know. It's hard to say, but I think that's for me what we're working towards in relationships. Okay, I really want to thank all of you for jumping in. It's just, it's incredible that even in this platform, I feel that I am getting to hear your comments and we're having rich, nuanced conversations, and I'm grateful for that. Next week we'll be together and we'll be looking at that language of loving feedback. How do we say when something is wrong or when something is hard, which is so critical and can be so difficult in relationships. So that's all for today. Happy learning.
Thank you so much, Rav Avi. So usually we open up for a little Q&A at the end, but we've done that throughout this entire presentation through the chat. It was so amazing to be able to read everyone's comments and questions throughout the presentation. Thank you so much, Rav Avi. This was an amazing presentation. Join us again. I've got to help right here. Everyone again for our programs next week. It's so nice to see everybody, and have a great day. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you.